Correct. Ooh, tons of fun.
Get your backyard wrestling merch at ProWrestlingTees.com.
We were always very critical of our backyard wrestling product. We would scrutinize each and every show to see what we could do better and find ways of improving. Obviously, we focused on the in-ring action, but it also applied to our production value and how our product was presented. One of the biggest pieces of production value in pro wrestling is a Jumbotron or Titantron, just a big-ass screen so people can see the action. I was fortunate enough to have a large 45-inch big screen TV that would do the trick. This was before flat screens, so this thing was huge and a total pain in the ass to move around. We set up a VCR at ringside, ran the camcorder into its input, and then ran the output into a splitter with a monitor for the commentators and the other line going to the TV. It worked okay. This setup meant the camera was pretty much locked in one position for the entire show, so we lost out on the freedom to move around. Also, with this being a rear projection TV, it made it really hard to see in direct sunlight. It looked cool when it worked, but the juice just wasn't worth the squeeze, so we only used it a handful of times. We would, however, set up a VCR with a TV occasionally to run pre-taped segments backstage. Nowadays, you can have a way better setup for super cheap, but back in 2001, this was the best we could do. We also wanted to find ways of improving our entrances. At one point, we had made a chain link curtain that was supposed to roll up as we made our way to the ring. It kinda worked, but more often than not, it got stuck, and eventually we dropped it altogether. I did eventually invest in a fog machine, and that alone made such a huge difference. People would literally argue over who got to come out to fog. Originally, the group Apocalyptic X were the only ones allowed to have fog for their entrance so we could keep the mystique around their group. But once the group lost its luster, the fog machine was pretty much fair game for whoever wanted it. One thing I always wanted to have was lower thirds, those name bars at the bottom of the screen. Shooting and editing on tape meant the only real way to have them would be to use the in-camera title feature and add someone's name manually, character by character. It was janky and impractical, so we tried it once and then gave up. But I would eventually use that to at least brand our shows with our Fed's initials. In early 2003, I had gotten a USB capture dongle and tried editing one of our shows in iMovie. I could finally add custom lower thirds that I had made in Photoshop, but unfortunately, I didn't know anything about resolution or codecs, so the finished show suffered from a noticeable drop in quality. The only way I had to get the edited show off my iMac and onto the master tape all of our shows were backed up to was to burn it to a VCD and then play that on a DVD player and record it back onto the master tape. By the time we got to CCW, it became much easier to add lower thirds, and by AWF, they got even more advanced, and as a bonus, at that particular point, our shows were going straight to YouTube, so we didn't have a quality degradation by going back to a tape. Nowadays, lower thirds are drag and drop in any editor, but back then, it was a lot more complicated to incorporate them. When we started wrestling in front of an audience, I needed to start promoting our shows, so I created flyers for our events. I didn't really know much about graphic design, and I only knew the basics of Photoshop at that time, and it shows. Fast forward 20 years later, and now I'm a professional graphic designer, and the difference is night and day. Looking back, it's easy to call these attempts at production value janky, but I'd be lying if I said they didn't have their own charm to them. All of this is so easy now, but 25 years ago, we were limited by the technology at the time, and it forced us to get creative, to try stuff, to fail, and to learn from those failures. These were formative years in a lot of ways, and I wouldn't be the filmmaker I am today if it wasn't for this start in my backyard with my friends every Saturday.